She was born in the Kazakh city of Taldykorgan, but the feeling of home disappeared long before she learned to pronounce her own name. She was about 2 or 3 years old when her life shifted into something most people never even imagine. A Romani camp became her only reality. The smell of open fires, loud adult voices, constant movement, adults who were always hiding, negotiating, arguing, and children who grew up somewhere on the edges of a criminal world they didn't understand. There were no bedtime stories, no toys, no protection. There was no childhood in the traditional sense, just a stream of events that felt normal because she knew nothing else. When she was around 6 or 7, the adults began handing her small packages. "Go give this to the man outside," they would say. She didn't know these were drugs. She didn't know she was participating in illegal deals. She only knew that adults trusted her with an important task. In their world, police didn't detain small children, which made kids perfect couriers. She accepted these errands the way other children accept chores. No one explained danger to her. She didn't even know such a word applied here. In her environment, danger was simply part of daily life, and therefore invisible. This world felt natural to her. She was born into a system that operated by unwritten rules. Responsibility came long before understanding. She thought everyone lived this way, adults doing their things, children doing theirs. Only later she would realize that most children walk dogs or carry school books, while she carried drugs. As she got older, a desire to escape this reality became overwhelming. Marriage seemed like the only exit. She married a Russian man, believing he could take her away from that life. Instead, she simply moved from one dysfunctional environment into another. Her husband was a drug user, and his addiction controlled everything. He promised he would quit. He begged her to have a child, saying that a baby would save them, change everything, force him to become clean. But these were only words. Every promise dissolved as quickly as his next dose. The violence came early. First verbal, then physical. She became pregnant hoping motherhood would change him, hoping that a child could pull a person out of darkness. But children don't fix adults. Her son became the only reason she stayed, but not the reason he changed. Eventually, she realized that staying meant losing herself, and possibly her child. She decided to leave. But leaving required money, and she had none. She had never worked. She had no profession, no experience. The only skill she had was the one she had absorbed in childhood, the very thing she was trying to escape. Desperation pushed her back into dealing. She contacted a dealer, took drugs wholesale, and began selling them to save enough money to flee. She didn't do it for profit, only for survival. She believed it was temporary, that she could get out before things got worse. She didn't understand she was already being watched. She was arrested, suddenly, without warning. And in that moment, she realized childhood games had long ended. Adult life was beginning, not with a job or a new apartment, but with criminal charges. She hoped for bail, hoped it was a mistake, hoped someone would consider her a young mother in a desperate situation. But the system operated differently. While she was in the holding cell, her apartment was searched. More drugs were found. A second case. Especially large amount. No chance of release. Her life flipped instantly. From dreams of escaping an abusive marriage to legal terminology, protocols, articles of criminal law, none of which she understood. She didn't know how to demand a lawyer, how to appeal, how to refuse a confession. She was too scared, too inexperienced, too unaware of her rights. And the system knew exactly how to deal with people like her. The result was a harsh sentence, the kind given to professional dealers. No one cared about her age, her child, or her circumstances. In one moment, her future narrowed down to a single path: prison transport, long, suffocating, and seemingly endless. That was the moment she realized that she no longer controlled anything in her life, and she had no idea how much worse it was going to get. When they took her out of the holding cell and led her down the hallway to the investigator's office, her legs barely moved. Inside, she felt a strange mix of hope and dread. She believed the worst had already passed. The arrest, the first nights in custody, the first interrogations. She thought the investigator might at least discuss bail or some form of leniency, or consider the fact that she was a young mother. Instead, she saw a woman behind the desk with a look of satisfaction on her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment just to crush whatever hope remained. The investigator told her she wasn't going home, she wouldn't be released, and that there was now a second criminal case. While she was in the detention facility, officers searched her home with witnesses present and found more drugs, supposedly hidden inside a couch cushion. Another charge, another especially large amount. No chance for bail, no chance for release pending trial. The investigator said it almost with pleasure, as if she enjoyed pronouncing sentences before a judge ever could. That news broke what was left of her resistance. Just days earlier, she was thinking about leaving her husband, finding an apartment, building a future with her son. Now her life was drowning in legal terms she didn't understand. She didn't know she had the right to challenge the search, to demand independent analysis, to request a different lawyer. She had no experience, no knowledge, and no one who cared enough to guide her. And the system moved quickly against people like her. Eventually, the decision came down. A full sentence, the kind usually given to major drug dealers. No consideration for her age, her situation, or her child. It was final, simple, cold, and it changed everything. Her life instantly transformed into a timeline marked by courtrooms, metal doors, paperwork, and a journey toward a place she had never imagined she would see. A women's correctional colony. The transport itself was a shock. They moved her by a special prison train, known as a Stolypin carriage, something the American prison system doesn't have. Imagine an old passenger car converted into a moving cage. No real compartments, only iron bars, metal bunks, the smell of stale cigarettes, sweat, and fear. Women were packed inside like cargo. Air was scarce. Smoke hung heavy. The doors stayed shut for hours at a time. No hot water, no access to a bathroom unless the train was moving, no ability to sit comfortably. It wasn't a trip. It was a slow, grinding breakdown of human dignity. At one point, she heard the sound of chains dragging across the metal floor. She asked the escorting officer what it was. He answered calmly. A lifer, a man serving a life sentence, was being walked to the restroom. When he passed by, she looked up. Their eyes met for a brief second. In his eyes, she saw no anger, no defiance, no fear, just emptiness, a hollow void where life once was. It terrified her. In that moment, she realized that prison doesn't need violence to kill a person. It can erase them slowly, quietly, from the inside out. The journey to the colony took nearly a month. When the transport finally stopped and the doors opened, a group of about 15 staff members stood waiting. They weren't there to welcome anyone. They stood like a line of guards awaiting a delivery. The women were ordered out, lined up, and told to place their hands behind their backs. No eye contact, no talking, only commands. It took seconds for her to understand. Nobody here would care that these were women. This was a regime, a system, a place where mercy didn't exist. Her first days were a blur of fear. She cried constantly, couldn't understand the rules or the rhythm of the place. A part of her still clung to the fantasy that someone would eventually open the door and say, "There's been a mistake. You can go home." She held on to that thought the way drowning people hold on to air. But every morning the reality hit again. She wasn't leaving. Soon she began to encounter the inmates who had been there many times before. Women who behaved as if the colony were a second home. Hard, confident, experienced. Among them was one woman she would never forget. Short hair, bright red lipstick, missing teeth, and the boldness of someone who had long ago given up caring what anyone thought. She walked right up to her and said, without hesitation, "You'll be mine." The shock was immediate. She had heard stories about women's colonies, about relationships, domination, husbands, wives, and sometimes violence. But hearing stories and standing face to face with that reality were two different things. And she understood, for the first time, that this world had its own rules. Rules she would have to learn quickly, or not survive. The longer she stayed inside the colony, the more she realized it wasn't just a place where freedom was taken away. It was a closed ecosystem with its own hierarchy, its own social codes, its own invisible laws. Nothing in this environment resembled the outside world. Personal boundaries didn't work the same way. Relationships didn't work the same way. Strength had a different meaning. Weakness did too. What would look strange or taboo to an outsider was ordinary here. Not because the women suddenly changed their orientation, but because when you remove affection, human touch, and emotional support for years, people start searching for warmth wherever they can find it. She saw relationships form in real time. Someone giving chocolates, someone sharing a cigarette, someone leaving a small handwritten note that said, "Good night, stay strong." She watched women who had spent decades surviving abuse, prison, addiction, poverty, and who suddenly became soft and gentle, but only with the person they chose. It was a strange blend of emotional hunger, loneliness, and a distorted version of love that existed only in places where men didn't. She learned there were different types of women in these relationships. Some behaved like men: short hair, men's underwear, men's deodorant, men's shampoo. Their families sent them these things in packages because that's how they presented themselves. Some gave intimacy but didn't take any in return. Some used relationships for protection or status, and some genuinely formed emotional bonds, even though the environment twisted those bonds into something unrecognizable compared to the outside world. Eventually, a girl from another section began to take care of her. She didn't demand anything. She didn't cross physical boundaries. She simply left notes on her bunk. "Good night, Rada," or a quote, or just a small piece of candy. It wasn't romance. It was survival. A reminder that she was still human, that she mattered to someone in a place designed to make you feel like a number. She accepted these gestures because they made the days slightly less heavy. Every morning followed the exact same script. Wake up at 6 in the morning to the Russian national anthem. Everyone jumped up instantly. Beds had to be made perfectly. A quick run to wash up. If someone was fast enough, they managed a sip of tea or coffee. Then formation, marching to the cafeteria, singing mandatory songs as they walked. One song in particular got stuck in her mind forever. "Don't cry, girl. The years will pass." After that came roll call, then distribution to workstations. They worked in a sewing factory inside the colony. First, they sewed uniforms for male prisoners, then uniforms for traffic police officers, then shirts for military generals. The work was mind-numbing, repetitive, exhausting, endless. It turned months into identical blocks of time. She almost never got sick. She knew sickness here meant trouble. You didn't get treatment. You got half a pill of Analgin, a cheap Soviet painkiller. That same half pill was supposed to cure everything: fever, diarrhea, migraines, cramps. Personal medications were rare and usually forbidden. Women with HIV were many. Some were forced to take chemotherapy drugs that caused their hair to fall out, even when they weren't sure they needed them. Refusing the pills meant a disciplinary report and punishment. The colony didn't treat people. It met quotas. Conflicts among inmates could erupt over anything. Privacy didn't exist. One day she told a woman from their section not to dip her washing bucket into the communal water tank, the same bucket she carried to the toilet. The woman exploded. She attacked her physically. It didn't matter that the complaint was reasonable. What mattered was pride, status, and the constant tension built into life there. Stress was everywhere. In the cafeteria, the smell and sight of the food could trigger nausea. On the yard, the shouts of guards could make your pulse spike. In the barracks, the constant noise, the snoring, the crying, the whispering. The only solitude came during sleep. 7 or 8 hours when your brain finally shut off and the prison walls faded away. She discovered something unexpected. Humans adapt to anything, even to this. After a few years, she no longer felt like a visitor in this nightmare. She could read people instantly, their moods, their motives, the danger levels. She learned who to avoid, who to trust, who would snap under pressure. And in those long nights, she began to study not just others, but herself. She started asking questions she had never dared to ask before. Why do people break? When do they break? And how close had she herself come to breaking before prison ever entered her life? Because she knew the truth. The darkest moments of her life were not inside these walls. They were at home, long before her arrest, long before the drugs, long before the colony. The most terrifying things she had ever seen were done by a man who should have protected her. The more time she spent in the colony, the more she found herself analyzing not only her own story, but the stories of the women around her. She started with simple questions. What were they in for? What happened to them? Where did their lives go wrong? Eventually, she began recognizing criminal charges just by listening. Murder, severe bodily harm, robbery, fraud. Some were thieves, some were drug dealers, some were women who had tried to defend themselves from violent husbands, but the justice system labeled it differently. She listened carefully, compared their stories to her own, and tried to understand. At what point does a person cross the line they can never return from? She caught herself paying special attention to those who were convicted of murder. Not out of fascination with violence, but because she herself had once stood frighteningly close to that line. The memories came back the same way every time. Short, sharp flashes. A kitchen. Night. The smell of cigarettes. Heavy footsteps. Her mother sliding down a wall after being hit. And her, a young girl, holding a knife and thinking that maybe this was the only way to stop it. Her stepfather did not enter their life as a monster. At first, he was just an adult man who covered the bills, who brought home groceries. But slowly, he became the source of constant fear. He drank, he snapped, and every time he snapped, it was the weakest who suffered. Her mother, her younger brother, and her. Pain didn't come as punishment for misbehavior. It came simply because he decided so. You could clean the entire house, cook dinner, keep the baby quiet, do everything perfectly, and still get beaten. Some moments were burned into her memory so deeply they felt like scenes from a film she wished she could unwatch. He once picked up a heavy poof and threw it at her with full force. He once grabbed her by the clothes, dragged her to the window, opened it, and hung her out from the 5th floor, threatening to drop her. He whipped her with a belt with a metal buckle until she bled. One time he stabbed a fork into her hand hard enough that it stayed stuck there like a nail. None of it made sense. None of it had a reason. It was pure rage directed at a child because she was too small to fight back. There was a night she remembered more vividly than the rest. Her mother was out of town for a couple of days. Her stepfather brought home his mistress, a Romani woman, and they drank through the night. By morning the mistress passed out, and he walked into the room where she slept. There was no reason, no provocation, no explanation. He just began beating her. Hard. Over and over. She couldn't tell if she was awake or fainting. She prayed for the night to end. He didn't touch her sexually, but the violence itself was its own kind of violation. He treated her like an object he owned, something he could break whenever he needed to release anger. She remembered waking up after one beating, her mother sitting over her, carefully peeling a t-shirt from her back because it had dried onto the blood. There was no dramatic music, no rescue, no intervention. There was just the quiet horror of everyday life that no one outside ever saw. No neighbors intervened. No teachers noticed. No relatives stepped in. Her childhood was a closed box no one wanted to open. At some point, a plan formed in her mind. Not a detailed one, just a simple, desperate idea. She would hide in her room until he was drunk enough, until he smoked his last cigarette and fell asleep. She could tell by smell and breathing when he finally passed out. Then she would go into the kitchen, pick up a knife, and stand next to his bed. She would stare at him, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing. Her hand would shake, tears would run down her face, and one thought filled her mind. If she did it now, everything would stop. No more beatings, no more threats to throw her from the balcony, no more watching him hurt her mother, no more fear. But every time she stood there, knife in hand, something inside her held her back. It wasn't compassion for him. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something deeper. A line she couldn't cross simply because she was still a child trying to survive. In the colony, hearing stories from women who had crossed that line, she sometimes felt a terrifying sense of understanding. She didn't justify anyone, but she realized many of them came from the same kind of kitchens, the same long nights, the same endless cycles of violence. The legal system spoke in articles, charges, sentences, but the human story behind those crimes often started in places that were already violent long before the crime itself happened. Later she learned her stepfather had died. He was hit by a car while crossing the street. Doctors amputated his leg. He died in a hospital, slowly, painfully, practically like a homeless man. When she heard this, her emotions were impossible to untangle. Sometimes she wanted to light a candle for peace for his soul. Sometimes she wanted to curse him. Sometimes she found herself thinking, if she had been there, maybe she would have helped him. Not because he deserved it, but because she still wanted to believe there was something human left in him. But the past didn't leave her. Even in prison, even surrounded by women with criminal histories, even after everything she had lived through. The worst memories of her life were not the drug charges, not the prison transport, not the colony. The worst part was a little girl staring at a grown man who chose to destroy her instead of protect her. When word reached the Romani community that she had run away and married a Russian man, they immediately cut her off. To them, she was no longer a proper woman. She wasn't a virgin anymore, which meant she held no cultural value. They erased her existence as easily as closing a door. She became someone who didn't belong anywhere. Not to her old community, not to her new life, not to her marriage. She became pregnant only a few months after leaving and gave birth to her son, Nikita. When she was arrested, he was 1 year and 4 months old. After she was taken away, she received only 2 letters with his photographs. Pictures of him already walking, already going to preschool. Both letters were sent not by family, but by a friend. Her husband's relatives never wrote to her. They never told her how the baby was growing, what he was learning, what he sounded like. She remembers the first and only phone call where Nikita picked up the receiver. She dialed the home number. A small voice said, "Hello?" She whispered, "Hello, Nikita." And he asked, "Who is this? Who are you?" She wanted so badly to say, "It's your mother." But she didn't want to traumatize him or confuse him. She stayed silent. He hung up. And she stood there for her entire 15 minutes of phone time, holding the receiver to her ear, crying quietly so no one would see. She realized that moment was worse than her sentencing, worse than the transport, worse than any beating she had suffered. Hearing her child's voice and knowing he didn't know her, that pain didn't go away for years. When she was finally released, she had nowhere to go. No home, no savings, no family that would take her in. But her son was in Yekaterinburg, so she stayed near the city. She told herself she needed to find work, rent a room, build a small space where Nikita could visit her. But she couldn't take him full time. His grandmother had legal custody, and she had nothing to offer yet. So she began from zero. Her first job was as a sales clerk. Then she learned to make coffee and worked as a barista. She studied the craft because it was one of the few jobs open to her with no education, no connections, no clean record. She remembers filling out job applications, reaching the question, "Do you have a criminal record?" She always answered honestly, and every time, employers stared at her with suspicion, as if she were contaminated, as if an ex-inmate belonged back in prison instead of in society. She couldn't understand the logic. If the system sentenced her so that she could reform, then why, after serving the sentence, was she still treated as guilty? How was she supposed to live honestly if no one would give her a job? What were people like her expected to do? Return to dealing, return to crime, return to the very path that ruined their lives. She saw so many women end up back in prison because society left them no option, and she refused to be one of them. Despite everything, she rebuilt part of her life. Her relationship with her son healed almost instantly when they saw each other. He looked at her and said, "Oh, so this is who I look like." They bonded immediately, something she had feared might never happen. They still talk now, still stay close, still understand each other. But rebuilding herself was harder. She tried different things: hairstyling, makeup, eyelash extensions, permanent brow tattoos. She even opened a small clothing showroom once, but it didn't give her the feeling she was searching for. It was as if she had lost the ability to understand who she was or what she wanted. The years in the camp, the violence at home, the colony, all of it created a version of her that was always alert, always braced for danger. As an adult, she often felt more lost than she had ever felt as a child. She dreams of having a daughter one day. She already has a name for her, Yaroslava, Jasechka for short. She imagines pouring into that girl all the gentleness she never received. She imagines never raising her voice, never letting anyone hurt her, never letting her feel unsafe for even a moment. She imagines giving her the life she herself never had, the kind that starts with warmth instead of fear. Today, she still feels like she's searching for her place. She says she tried everything: beauty work, fashion, small business. None of it clicked. Now she's working towards starting her own eyelash extension brand. Something small, something entirely her own. Something that would let her stand on her feet without depending on anyone. She hopes it works out. Not because she wants money or status, but because she wants her life to finally belong to her. Not to a tabber, not to an abusive man, not to the system, not to the past. Just her.